Hey everyone, and welcome back to another very exciting Blender tutorial. This is part 4 in my absolute beginner tutorial series for how to use Blender 2.9. And since this is a series, I will assume that you have watched all of the previous parts. If you haven't yet, I'll drop you the links to those down in the video description, so be sure to check them out first before you try to jump into this one. In the last part of the series, we took this very plain looking pirate treasure chest and assigned some materials to it to make it look a little more interesting. However, it's still on the plain side, so in this tutorial I want to show you how to apply image textures to your 3D models to make them look a whole lot better. For that, we will also talk about UV mapping in Blender. UV mapping is the process of essentially unwrapping the three-dimensional geometry of your models so that you can then map them to a flat, two-dimensional image texture. Now, since this is part 4 in this series, this is going to be a low intermediate tutorial. By the way, congratulations for making it this far, and I will assume that you've watched the previous parts or you're at least familiar with the basics of how Blender works. But now, before I waffle on forever, let's finally jump into the tutorial. Welcome back to the exciting world of Blender, and this is exactly where we left off at the last part of this tutorial series. We modeled our 3D pirate chest and assigned some basic materials to it just so it doesn't look quite so plain. However, all of our materials look pretty plain and basic, so let's add some textures to them to just add a little bit more detail into how this treasure chest looks. Now, there's tons of great places online where you can find free textures to use. The one that I really like is 3dtextures.me. It's run by a guy called Paolo, just off Patreon and, just donations of people. He creates absolutely free textures. They're public domain, so you can use them for anything that you want. Just don't claim that you made them. And there's some really great stuff in here, so highly recommend go check that out. I'll drop you the links to that down in the video description. Now, from his website, I have downloaded 3 textures. One called Gold Nugget 001, Metal Scratched 008, and Stylized Wood Planks 001. And we're going to use these textures to assign to our model and make our pirate chest look a whole lot more interesting. As always, if you do want to follow along with this tutorial, you will be able to download all of the files you need from our website. So simply go to surfacestudio.com/downloads and you'll be able to grab all of the files and follow along. Now, let's start out by making our wood material look a little bit more interesting and actually like wood. If you select the base of the treasure chest, we have 4 materials on there: a red mat, skull mat, wood mat, and metal mat. Let's select the wood mat material, come down in the material properties, and right now the base color here is set to brown. And that's why all we have is brown color. But let's make this look actually like wood by using an image texture. For that, in the material properties, next to the base color on the left-hand side, you'll find this yellow dot here. And if you click on this, this is going to bring up a window allowing you to connect all sorts of inputs into your base color, and the color will then be defined by what comes from that input rather than by the solid color we've selected. So you can assign things like brick or checker textures, image textures, gradients, Voronoi, all sorts of different calculations and other functions into this to drive that base color from something else. The one we want to pick is called image texture. And by the way, if you can't see that in here, scroll up on your mouse wheel. Sometimes it's hidden at the top of this pop-up window. It doesn't work perfectly. So let's select image texture. All of the wood has gone black because we haven't actually assigned any texture to that yet. Back in the material properties, now you'll have this little drop down here. So base color is now an image texture rather than a solid color. And in here, you can now either create a new texture to assign or open an existing one. Let's click on open. That's going to open the file browser. Let's navigate to where we downloaded all of our textures to. I'm going to jump into the Stylized Wood Planks 001 folder in here. Over on the top right hand side, let's switch this over to icon mode so we can actually see what this is. And most textures that you download online for a 3D program contain more than a single image. And that is because there's usually one that defines the base color, which is just the basic color of your material. But on top of that, there's often additional textures used to define the areas of roughness or the heights or the normals. We'll get to that in a bit. This is kind of how the material reacts and interacts with light. So there's lots of different options to make this look a whole lot better. For now, I just want to select the Stylized Wood Planks base color, hit open to connect that into our base color input. Give that just a second. And now we have the actual texture appear on our material because we've assigned that to be the base color for our material. Now, it doesn't sit quite right. It's weirdly distorted on the side. The scaling is all off, and we'll fix that in just a minute. But for now, let's also assign an image texture for the metal parts of this treasure chest. So in the material browser. Let's come all the way to the top. Make sure you select the metal matte material. And here you can see the base color is still just a solid color. So again, let's click on this yellow input icon here. Find the image texture in the pop-up. Let's select that. It'll go black because we haven't assigned anything. So again, in the image texture properties, let's click on Open Image. Navigate to where you downloaded the textures. And I'm going to select this Metal Scratched 008 texture in here. And again, quite a few different images in this folder for different parts of the material. For now, I really just want to select this Metal Scratched 008 base color JPEG here. Double click that or hit Open Image. And now you have actual metal texture on the metal parts of this treasure chest. Again, it doesn't really look great just yet. And that is actually due to the way that we haven't told Blender just yet how to map these flat 2D image textures to the 3D geometry of our model, and that is done via UV mapping. For that, we will have to use the UV editor, and we can bring up a new panel just by coming to the bottom of the 3D viewport just until your cursor changes to this double arrow, right click, select to create a, well, let's make a vertical split our 3D viewport in two. On the left hand side, let's change this one from the 3D viewport over to the UV editor. And let's zoom in just by scrolling up on the mouse wheel. By the way, you can click and hold your middle mouse button and drag around. And right now we see nothing at all. However, we can display an image or an image texture in the UV editor by coming to the top drop down here. You can also create and open new images directly in here. However, we've already imported two images into our project. So let's pop open this image browser. And in here, you now have your metal scratched base color and your stylized wood planks base color. By the way, you also have this confused skull that we imported in an earlier part of the series. But let's select this stylized wood planks base color here. That's a bit big. Let's zoom right back out. So this is the texture that we actually assigned to all of the wooden parts of our treasure chest. However, Blender doesn't quite know yet how to map this 2D texture to the 3D geometry, and that's what we need to do now. So with the base of the treasure chest selected, press Tab to go into edit mode. Let's rotate around a little bit and select just the side of the treasure chest because that's where we can more easily see how this UV mapping works. And with that face selected, in the UV editor, you can see this white rectangle here, and this is actually the face that we have selected. It has 4 corner points, and you can click on these to select them or hold down Shift to select multiple ones. And this rectangle is exactly the geometry of our face, and it shows how the texture underneath it is mapped to that face. The cool thing is you can actually just select your geometry in the UV editor, press G to move that around, and can you see how on the right hand side the mapping for that texture changes to show exactly what is underneath the rectangle on the left. And this is how we tell Blender how to map our geometry to the textures. The cool thing is you can now, let's simply click and drag marquee around all of them, press S to scale, and let's drag out to scale this texture up. And on the 3D view on the right hand side, you can see how that changes, how that texture is mapped. Now it's faded out a little bit because you have this selection highlight here. So let's unselect everything for a second. And that looks much better. Now it's still not perfect. Also, I'm noticing that I have these edges here on the side, these really thin strips that actually do also have that same image texture. So let's do this properly. Let's select the face in the middle and let's select these two strips on the side here that also have that wood material assigned. And in the UV editor, you can see how that's kind of, these strips are really thin. Nothing is really mapped properly, and you can go through manually and move all of these points around to lay them out exactly the way you want to. But often I find it easy to just start with Blender giving me a better mapping by default. And the way to do this is select the geometry that you want to map to your texture. So I've got these sides selected right here. Then come up to the top of the 3D view, make sure you are in edit mode, and you should have an option for UVs. Click on that. And then select Smart UV Project, which, as that tooltip tells you, will unwrap those selected faces to lay them out a bit better in the UV editor. So let's do that. You can tweak the settings. I usually leave this on default. Hit OK. And now in the UV editor, I actually have 3 connected rectangles, 2 for the sides and 1 for that middle face that I have right here. By the way, in the top left-hand side of the UV editor, similar to what you have in edit mode, you have vertex, edge, and face selection modes. And you can toggle between them by pressing 1, 2, or 3 on your keyboard. Let's go into face selection mode. And you can now click on these faces, press G for grab and move that around. And again, you can see how the mapping on the right-hand side changes. However, let's right-click and cancel that because all of these faces really represent the same plane. Let's click and drag around them to box select them all. And by the way, Smart UV Project will lay these out automatically based on the area they actually have on the object. So smaller areas will occupy a smaller part of the texture, larger areas will get a bigger slice of the texture, and it just lays it out much more realistically. But now with all of these selected, let's just press S. Let's just scale it down a little bit. And again, feel free to tweak this in any way you want. I'm just going to give it maybe so it overlays 3 or 4 of these planks and just move this around. It kind of aligns with the edges of some of the texture detail right there. Let's just click into the 3D viewport to unselect everything. And yeah, that looks so much better, right? Like we actually now have a proper wooden texture on the side of the treasure chest. Now let's repeat that with the rest of the treasure chest. Let's select all of the other faces that use that wood material on the treasure chest base and do pick those little thin strips on the side as well, just to make sure we include everything that uses that wood material and the wooden texture. That looks pretty good. So we've got everything selected now. If you zoom out in the UV editor, you can see that's all these disconnected random pieces that Blender starts out with. But fortunately, Blender gives us the power to automatically lay this out a little bit nicer. So with all of those faces selected, in the 3D viewport, come up to UV, and let's again select the Smart UV Project. Let's hit OK. And that immediately looks a whole lot better. However, I'm noticing that some of the plants are horizontal, others are vertical, so we'll fix that up in a second. What I might actually do, I might actually reselect the faces we laid out before as well. So I've got all of the wooden pieces selected all at once. It just usually gives you more consistent results. Let's come up into UV, Smart UV Project, hit OK to lay all of them out nice and clean from the get-go with more appropriate proportions. Let's just click and unselect. And size-wise, that actually looks really good. Now, I don't like that the planks on the front and the back of the treasure chest are horizontal rather than vertical. So let's simply select those faces, hold down Shift to select all of them, and again, include those little strips on the side, as well as the 2 big ones on the back. And what we can do is we can now simply rotate these faces in the UV editor to change how that texture is mapped. So let's click, drag around them to select all of them, press R to rotate them, and you can see how that changes the texture, right? So on my keyboard, I'm actually going to type 90 to rotate them exactly 90 degrees. Press G to move them around to where I want them to sit. And you can move individual faces as well. By the way, if you move these faces in the UV editor outside of where the texture sits, it's just going to wrap around again. It's essentially on the right-hand side, it's going to come back on the left. Anything running over on the top is going to come back on the bottom. But because all of the textures from the website I showed you earlier are seamless, it doesn't actually matter exactly whether you're running over or not. If you're using different textures, that might be a different story. But for this, actually looks pretty good. Let's just drop them right there. Let's check this out. And I'd say that looks really nice. With the cursor over your 3D view, press Tab to go back out of edit mode. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Next, let's fix how this metal material sits. Now, it generally has less texture, so it's not as noticeable, but I can see there's some area where it kind of stretches weirdly, and it's some areas it's really detailed, others it's a bit more blurred out. So again, with the treasure chest base selected, press Tab to go back into edit mode. And as you now select these metal pieces, you'll see they also show up on this wood texture here on the left, and that's because the UV editor just shows you whichever texture you have selected. It doesn't necessarily show you the texture that is applied to that part of your geometry. So in order to see the metal texture, come back up to the top, and it's actually pushed out to the right hand side here. Let me just make that a bit smaller. Let's just pop open this drop down here and change that over to metal scratched 008 underscore base color. That's now going to show us our metal texture, and that makes a little bit more sense. Let me just shrink that right back down. And you can now hold down Shift and select all of the bits and pieces that have that metal material assigned to them, and you might be here for a little while. There's a much easier way to do this. In the Material tab, let's simply come to the top, select the metal material, and just like we could assign faces to a material while in edit mode, you can also select them. So with this metal material selected, next to the Assign button, you'll find Select. Let's click that. And that is going to select all of the geometry that has that material assigned, which makes that really easy. Again, this is very ugly default, so let's again lay these out a little bit more relative to their actual size on our 3D model. So with all of those selected, come into UV, Smart UV Project, let's simply hit OK. And yeah, that looks a little bit more logical. If you zoom in now, you can also see that texture scale is consistent across everything we've selected, but it's still a little bit too blurred out. So what I might do is click into the UV editor, press A to select everything, S to scale, and let's just scale this out. And this is going to make the texture as it appears on the treasure chest a little bit finer. I'm going to scale this out a fair bit. Let's check this out. And yeah, that's probably maybe just a little bit more like that. Let's zoom back out, tap back out of edit mode. And I think that actually looks really cool. Now you can always come back into edit mode, select any faces that you don't like, how the texture is applied, go back to the UV editor and just change how that maps to the underlying texture. So you have full control over that. But I just want to show you how to do the basic process. The base of our treasure chest is pretty much fixed, but the lid looks hella ugly. So let's select the lid of our treasure chest, press tab to go into edit mode. Let's fix the metal parts first. And for that again, let's select the metal matte, hit select to select all of the faces on our 3D model that have that material assigned to them. Also that works well because we still have the metal texture selected in our UV editor, so we can see that straight away. Again, come into UV. And by the way, besides Smart UV Project, there's actually tons of other ways to project and generate those UVs and the way the geometries map to your textures. Play around with them, have fun. There's some cool stuff in here. You can also do things like marking and clearing seams, which tells Blender how to slice and unwrap that 3D model into a flat packed surface. But again, that might be a topic for another tutorial. So again, let's just simply select Smart UV Project, hit OK. Click back into the UV editor, press A to select everything, S, and let's just again just scale that up a fair bit. So, the scale of that matches about the scale we have on the base. Let's just tap back out and check that out. Not too bad. Let's just go back. Maybe I'll scale it up just a little bit more. That looks pretty good. And now let's fix the wood as well. So let's return into edit mode. And in the UV editor, let's just change the texture from metal scratched back over to our stylized wood planks. And just to get us started, let's select the wood matte, hit select to select all of those faces. And we still have all of the metal ones selected. So let's press AA to unselect everything. With the wood material selected, hit select to select only those faces. UV, Smart UV Project, hit OK to lay them out, just to give them some initial layout. Let's just tap back out. The sides are not bad. The sides are a little bit too big though. So back into edit mode. Let's select only the faces on the side. So I just want to select the two sides of this treasure chest so I can scale those ones up just a little bit. You can press A or just box marquee select the whole thing. Let's press S to scale that up a little bit. So again, I'm just trying to match the scaling of that up about to the scaling of the wood on the base. And again, G to move these around. That might look quite okay. Yep, I think that looks pretty good. Let's deal with the wooden panels running around the lid. So again, back to edit mode, press AA to unselect everything, hold down Alt Option on your keyboard, Shift and click near the rim running around the long side so we can select those face loops of all of the three pieces along the lid. With the cursor over the UV editor, press A to select everything, S, and let's just scale that up again just a little bit, just to make the wood planks just a little bit more detailed and smaller. Come back into the 3D view, press AA to unselect everything, and that looks pretty good. I just don't like how the panels here along this side are kind of going vertical instead of horizontal. So let's select the faces just around the edge of that lid. Come back into the UV editor, press R for rotate, and then enter 90 on your keyboard to rotate that exactly 90 degrees. Left click to confirm, G to grab, and you can move them around and just place them exactly where you want them to be. Actually, do make sure you're in face select mode. Select one of them. I might actually drag them so that the upper edge kind of aligns with the dark corner of the piece of wood. So all of them kind of have that dark edge at the top. So that then runs along the upper edge on our 3D model as well. That already looks okay. But again, feel free to play with this and do whatever seems to make sense to you. Let's check that out. And yeah, see that makes much more sense. That now looks really nice. Let me just shrink down the UV editor on the left-hand side. We'll get to it in just a minute again. Let's just tap out of edit mode and just check out our treasure chest. And doesn't that look so much better just by assigning some basic textures to the base color of our materials? Now, let's take this just one more step further. If you kind of look at an angle at these wood panels here, now they're much nicer than they were before, but they are very flat, right? They're kind of equally shiny. It looks pretty flat, and I'd like the wood to feel like it actually has some structure, some actual texture to the wood. And for that, some of the additional image files that you get when you download textures from the internet are really, really useful. Now, there's different things for, adding variable roughness, specularity, displacement, bump maps. The one I'm going to use is a normal map, but before we start applying it, I want to explain very quickly what that does. Now, let's select the base of our pirate treasure chest, select the wood material, and if you come down a little bit, right now, the base color of this material is driven by this image texture, which is why we see the wooden color. However, all of the other properties like metallic, specular, tint, roughness, sheen, clear coat, all of them are still driven just by a fixed value. Now, all of them have inputs. You can drive them all with images, with calculation, with mathematical functions, whatever you want to. And the one that I want to modify is this normal property here. Now, if you remember from the editing tutorial part 2 in this series, the normals are essentially vectors in 3D space that define the direction of your vertices and faces on your 3D model. And they're super important because they're actually getting used to calculate things such as specularity, roughness, and how the light interacts with the surface. But let's have a quick look at the normals again. So with the base selected, press Tab to go into edit mode. Come to the top right-hand side of your 3D view and pop open this overlays drop down here. Come down to the bottom and in here you'll find your normals. So let's enable the normal displays for the vertices, but also for the faces. So these are now essentially the directions in which the normals are facing. And this is what Blender and all 3D programs use to calculate how light interacts with that surface. The problem is that, for example, this whole face here on the side only has a single normal. So every single pixel on this surface will get the same interaction with light. And that's why it all looks flat and uniform except for the base color. So what we really want to do is we want to drive this normal on a per pixel basis so that the way the light interacts with this surface changes from pixel to pixel, and you can then add texture into your materials so they don't seem so flat. If that didn't make sense, don't stress out, we'll go through the process now. For now, let's come back to the overlays and disable our normal display. Don't really need to see it, I just wanted to give a little bit of detailed context. So let's tab back into object mode with the base of the treasure chest still selected. Let's make sure we have the wood material selected. And let's come down. So past the base color, which we've already assigned, let's come all the way down to normal. And let's click on this. In this pop-up again, I don't quite like this. You can see this little arrow at the top. Just hover over that or scroll up on your mouse wheel to bring up all the other options. In here, I will now want to select an option called normal map because we're going to use an image texture to drive all of the normals across the surfaces so they don't look so uniform. So let's select that. Nothing has happened as of yet. Come down. Under normal, you now have additional options. Leave most of them on default. This one here that doesn't have a label, click into that. That's where you select the UV map. So just select the UV map, which is this normal map will use the same UV mapping that we've already set up for the base color. So the surface texture we're about to add will match the actual image color. So it'll match the look and feel of the wood underneath. And again, nothing has changed. The color is still consistent. But now this color, I want to click onto this little yellow dot here. And this I want to be an image texture. So let's select the image texture as an input into the color for our normal map. Come down, let's click open, and let's navigate into the same folder where we downloaded that stylized wood texture here. And in here you will find an image that's called stylized wood planks 001_normal. And this is the normal map that we want to assign. Now it looks really weird. If you actually open this up in detail, it's kind of this purplish weird texture. It kind of looks like the wood, but just really weirdly colored. And that's because the red, green and blue components of this texture don't represent color. They actually represent the X, Y and Z direction of the normal vectors at this point of the texture. So it's essentially just defining the way all of these different parts of this texture should interact with light to then give it a bit more of a three-dimensional and, textured feeling. So let's select the UV map to be assigned. Let's hit open. And we're not quite done yet. The last thing I want to do is I want to change this color space from sRGB, let's pop this open, to non-color because the normal map doesn't represent color. It's data for 3D vectors with XYZ components. So change this over to non-color, and that is important. And now if you check out the texture and look at it from the side when it reflects light, you can see this now feels like it's three-dimensional. The cool thing is you can also, in this normal map, now jack up the strength. And you can literally see how that texture seems to transform from something boring and flat to something that actually has genuine texture that interacts differently with the light and starts to look really three-dimensional. So this really helps to make your textures look so much better. And now you can come up and you can play with things like the roughness and the specularity to control how shiny that wood is and just tweak whatever else you want. Now, if that was a bit confusing, let's repeat this process for the metal material. Let's come up and select the metal material. In the material settings, let's come all the way down to normal. Click onto this little default pop-up here. Again, let's come to the very top until we find the normal map option for that. Let's be sure to select the UV map, so the material for the metal will map the color that we've already assigned. Let's click on the yellow dot next to the color to input our normal map into that. Let's select the image texture. Let's hit open and let's navigate to where we got that metal scratched from. And again, in here, you'll have a normal map. So let's select that, just double click it to assign it. Again, very important to change the color space from sRGB over to non-color. And again, let's come in a little bit so we can see how the light now interacts with that metal material. You can see the dents and scratches here. You can jack up the strength if you want that to be a little bit stronger, but I actually just want a little bit of scratches. What I might do though, I might lower the roughness a little bit more, just to get some of those shiny, rough corners here. And you can see that especially here on the front where the skull sits on the edges, that now actually looks like metal because the different parts of the textures interact differently with light, and that just looks so much better. Finally, the last thing I want to do in this tutorial, again using normal maps, is turn the eyes of the skull into kind of gemstones. And we're going to use normal maps to add some roughness and make them look a bit more 3D, and then subsurface scattering, which we touched on in the last tutorial, to add a bit of translucency. First off, however, though, I want to have the edges of these eyes now to be red as well, because I'm imagining the nose and the eyes being just made from crystal ruby material. So let's press Tab to go into edit mode, press AA to make sure we've unselected everything, hold down Alt or Option and Shift and click around the edge running along or around the outside of the eye there to select that, select the other one as well, and the one on the nose. Let's come up and make sure we assign the red material to that as well. So select the red material, hit Assign. So now the eyes are nice and red. The base color, I'm actually going to leave on red. I like red, but also it allows us then to just change the color later on. I really just want to add some texture. So all I'm going to do is add a normal map. So with the red material selected, come to the bottom, click on normal. Let's go through the process again. Come to the top. Let's select normal map, change the UV map to UV map, and we still have to set that up. We haven't gone through that yet for the eyes specifically, but let's just add an input into the color property, select an image texture. I'm going to hit open on that, come into textures. I'm going to come to this gold nugget 001. Didn't like the yellow too much, but I do like the texture of that. So I'm going to select the gold nugget 001 normal map, hit open to apply that. And again, nothing much has happened. So let's come down, change the color space from sRGB over to non-color. Let's check up the strength a little bit. You can kind of see it happening there, but the granularity, the scale isn't quite right. So let's make the UV editor, again, a little bit bigger and switch the texture that we're seeing from stylized wood over to my gold nugget normals. Make sure you have all of the faces selected that have that red material assigned. And again, you can also just come up here, red material, hit select to select all of those. Let's come to UV, Smart UV Project, hit OK. And yeah, that's maybe a bit too rough. So let's just select everything, press S to scale. I'm just going to scale it down a little bit. Kind of want them to be chunky, but not too crazy. You can also press G and just move that around until you find a pattern that looks good, maybe right about there. Let's recollapse the UV editor. Let's just come out, press Tab. And that's not too bad. Looks a bit dull though, and that's because it still looks pretty flat and boring. So let's add some subsurface scattering to make these gemstones look a little bit more translucent. So in the material properties, let's jack up this subsurface right here. But not too much, maybe 0.05, just a little bit, just to add a little bit of that gemstone-y feeling to it. Might also lower the roughness just to make them look a whole lot more shiny and add some more specularity. I'm also going to bring up the metal just a little bit to give it kind of that crystal metal-y feeling. And there you go, you get like these really nice shimmering gemstones sitting in there now. Because we left the base color on default, you can change that to blue or green or any other color that you like. Let's zoom back out. Let me just quickly add a light, just so that you can see how this light is now interacting with the textures that we've assigned to our pirate treasure chest. And it looks so much better than what we started out with at the start of this tutorial. Hopefully you found it useful. There's still a ton of stuff we haven't even talked about. We haven't even touched on the shader editor yet, which gives you next level control over how your materials look in Blender. But hopefully this covered all of the basics that you need to assign textures to your 3D models to just make them look a whole lot better. And that is all there is to it. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and please don't forget to like and subscribe if you would like to see more. All and any useful links you will find in the video description, and please leave any comments, questions or suggestions down below. And for that, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I will see you later.